Part 103. Different Dimension Red Alert World. Author, Sanqian Lang. Chapter 1026. What's going on? Why is there such a truce? Too weak. A truce is a truce, but why are we so cowardly? That is, everyone can see that the Allies are no longer our opponent. If they continue to fight, they will definitely lose. Shouldn't the truce require them to make concessions and let us take the majority? But why is the truce agreement so compromised? I don't understand. Why are the leaders so cowardly? Instead of a cowardly truce, it's better to fight them to the end. After fighting against the Allies for so long, who has served whom? Considering that they had jointly fought against the enemy, the truce was acceptable, but the content of the agreement made the coalition forces feel angry. The infantryman under Wang Ling even approached Wang Ling directly and asked what the reason was. But Wang Ling responded calmly, "What are you worrying about? Just go ahead and do what you have to do. The leaders naturally have their own intentions, so stop thinking about it." There was no way. Wang Ling still refused to say it clearly, and they couldn't ask any more questions, so they could only choose to shut up in frustration. What happened to the coalition forces? It's strange. They have the advantage in the battle for hegemony. If we continue to fight, we are the ones in danger. How come they were the first to submit the truce agreement? And they gave us all the benefits. Is there any trap? It's impossible. The coalition submitted it through diplomatic means. If we agree, this agreement will be real and effective. Also in an uproar were the Allied troops. The coalition's unreasonable play really confused them. In the Allied General Headquarters, General Bob looked at the template of the truce agreement, frowned, and was silent for a long time. Then he asked, "William, what's going on with the coalition forces? What do you think of this truce agreement?" General Williams' answer was surprising. The coalition's move really caught people off guard. "According to my idea, we might as well go down the slope and agree to the coalition's truce request in accordance with this agreement." "Agree?" General Bob seemed dissatisfied with this statement. "I hold the opposite view to you. The situation is obviously beneficial to the coalition forces, but they have chosen to make a truce agreement at this critical moment. This is not normal in itself. In my opinion, look, either the truce agreement is fraudulent, or there is something wrong within the coalition forces and they are eager to end the war for hegemony." "General Bob, my thoughts remain unchanged. Regardless of whether it is a fraud or not, at least we will not lose money if we agree to this agreement." "Well, that's good to say, but what we say can only be used as a reference. The final decision is made by those old guys." Truce agreement. What tricks are the coalition forces doing? Are they afraid of us? Like the coalition, the Allied forces are also a coalition of multinational forces, and they also have their own highest authority. In a mysterious little black room, the top leaders of the Allied forces are also discussing this matter in an emergency meeting. "Are you afraid of us? That's weird. You have been fighting with us for so long, and you still don't know what the temper of his coalition forces is. Then what's going on with this truce?" "I have read the truce agreement. It is very sincere. It will be very beneficial to us to give up 60% of the world's resources and the priority of various international activities. Not only is it very advantageous, if I hadn't known about the current situation of the battle for hegemony, I would have thought that the losing side was trying to compromise. But the situation is exactly the opposite. It is us who are in a disadvantageous situation. The coalition requested a truce at this time, and also took the initiative to give up the advantage. This doesn't make sense. Existence is the truth. Based on my understanding of the old stubbornness of the coalition forces, if we provoke a war for hegemony again, they will definitely fight us to the end. But now a truce agreement has been made, and it seems that they are eager for a truce. I think there must be some conflicts within the coalition forces that we don't know about, or they must be under impact, so they want to shift the focus away from the battle for hegemony. I agree with this statement. So, let's. Of course I can't agree. There is a problem within the coalition. What do we want to do? We want all the resources in the world, not just 60%. If we can cover them all, why should we give up 40% to the coalition? Refuse directly. No, hold on. Deny it outright. It's not a good thing to push the coalition forces into a hurry. The more they want to free up their hands from the battle for hegemony, the more we will not let them get what they want. Don't answer them, just hold off. And at the same time, I have to harass the front line from time to time. The longer it takes, the weaker the coalition forces will be, and the more beneficial it will be to us. Haha, this approach is so smart. Because of this decision, the small dark room actually continued to laugh for a while, and the laughter was very hearty. All the leaders of the Allied forces were very proud of this decision. However, they may not have thought that Wang Ling had already imagined this situation when he proposed the plan. They knew the leader of the coalition forces, but they didn't know Wang Ling. He was a guy who didn't follow common sense. With him causing trouble, how could it be so easy to guess the purpose of the coalition forces? While the group of Allied leaders were complacent, Wang Ling was leisurely looking at the truce agreement in his temporary command post. This agreement is not the one he originally proposed. Yesterday, the coalition leaders held temporary discussions specifically for this agreement and made major changes in it. However, the overall approach remains true to Wang Ling's intention, but many items that Wang Ling does not understand have been added. Overall, it is still very biased towards the Allies, and it is easy to mislead them. Team leader, how could the leaders initiate such a humiliating truce? Yes, General, I still don't understand. Although Sun Dehu and the others had been scolded not long ago, Li Tong, Gu Suanwu, and even General Luo Er's original deputy still couldn't hold it back and started asking. Wang Ling still did not disclose it, but just smiled and said, "Don't worry, this is not humiliation, this is called strategy. I won't tell you the details, just wait and see the show." The four of them glanced at each other. Although they still didn't understand, since Wang Ling was so confident, they had no choice but to remain silent. In the next week, the relationship between the two sides on the battlefield became somewhat subtle. The confused officers and soldiers on both sides were watching, but on the surface, it was still time to set up defenses and train, except for the occasional harassment from the Allies. The two sides almost never had a large-scale battle. After a week of confusion like this, the top leadership of the coalition finally took action again, revised the combat agreement, and passed it to the Allies through diplomacy. Different Dimension Red Alert World. Author, Sanqian Lang. Chapter 1027. The first step of the plan can be said to have been completed perfectly. The seemingly humiliating truce agreement did indeed arouse dissatisfaction among the coalition troops and make the Allied forces confused. The top leadership of the Allied forces even mistakenly believed that something had happened within the coalition forces. I practiced Tai Chi to delay time. On this basis, the Allied forces naturally started the second step, slightly modifying the content of the first truce agreement and submitting it to the Allies. This second truce agreement is generally similar to the first, except that on the basis of the original substantial concessions, some power was regained. On some major international affairs, the coalition stated that it has the same power as the Allies, and in the world the allocation of resources has also been changed, with the Allies occupying 58% and the coalition occupying 42%, a change of 2%. Just like last time, the contents of this agreement were spread out intentionally or unintentionally, and both armies heard about it. Although it is tougher than the first truce agreement, it is not much tougher. Overall, the Allied forces account for the majority. The coalition forces still have a very strong sense of humiliation, so the officers and soldiers on the coalition forces still do not buy it and complain. There was a lot of noise, but I didn't dare to make it public. As for the Allied forces, the officers and soldiers from all walks of life are still confused. Although the Allied forces are tougher than last time, they do not want to take too many rights. This change is not harmful at all, and many officers and soldiers do not take it to heart. But in the General Command Post, General William frowned. The agreement has changed. I don't know if there will be a truce agreement next time, and how it will change. I always feel very uneasy about this hand of the coalition forces, as if there is what conspiracy awaits us. General Bob also wavered. The coalition's uncharacteristic weakness does make me a little worried. However, it may be that we are too worried, and something may really happen within the coalition. We can only hope so. Ha ha ha, the coalition forces come to the truce agreement again. In the mysterious little dark room, the top leadership of the Allied forces gathered again to look at the second truce agreement. Although the attitude has changed compared to the first letter, and the original rights of the Allied forces have been deprived a little, but instead of being angry, these Allied leaders are not angry, but many people are gloating and making fun of them. Do you think the coalition forces are tougher this time? But overall they are still so submissive, which makes people feel ridiculous. Last time, we gave up almost 60% of our resources and most of our rights. This time, we want to get some back. Is it possible? I estimate that the conflicts within the coalition forces are more complicated than we thought. It has only been a week since the truce agreement was revised. In my opinion, this is a collective protest by the coalition forces, and there may be some troublemakers. The old diehards of the coalition forces have no choice but to, so we became a little tougher on us. This kind of thing is commonplace, but I didn't expect it to happen to the coalition forces again today. Haha, the more chaotic they are, the happier we will be. Let's just leave this truce agreement hanging. Yes, the coalition forces will definitely continue to protest, and the coalition forces will only become more and more chaotic. I am sure that due to pressure, the coalition forces will soon receive a third truce agreement, and it will be symbolically tougher. Ha ha ha, this is to be expected. In fact, the tougher it is, the more it proves that the coalition is panicked. Keep delaying, the battle for hegemony is probably almost over. Like last time, the top Allied leadership still chose to delay and gloated about it. However, is this not the case for the coalition forces? Seeing that the Allies did not reply, they guessed their attitude. They were also laughing in the Junta conference room. Some leaders even directly said that Wang Ling was too thief. Since the agreement has not been agreed, the battle for hegemony between the two sides is still going on. However, due to the turmoil surrounding the agreement, apart from small-scale harassment, there is still no large-scale war on the battlefield between the two sides. Both sides are waiting and watching. Just like this, another week passed, and sure enough, the coalition's third truce agreement came out. Compared with the second letter, this truce agreement once again has a tougher attitude. Originally, the coalition promised to have the same rights as the Allies in some international affairs, but this time it jumped to the forefront and directly declared on some matters. Only the coalition forces have priority and voice. As for the distribution of global resources, it changed again by 2%, with coalition forces occupying 44% and Allied forces occupying 56%. Although the Allied forces are gradually recovering their rights and interests after these two consecutive tough moves, the Allied forces still have the advantage in terms of the agreement. Not only do they occupy the majority of resources, but their rights in international affairs are generally greater than those of the Allied forces. This change reached the ears of the coalition troops, but a group of fanatics still refused to buy it, and they were still somewhat angry. As for the Allied forces, many officers and soldiers did not think so much. Watching the Allied forces advance step by step in the agreement, they were afraid that one day they would suffer a loss. Many people were looking forward to agreeing to this truce agreement. No, that's not right. In the General Command Post, General William, who has always had a sharp eye and a sharp sword, finally noticed something was wrong in these 3 consecutive truce agreements. There is something wrong with the agreement. The coalition forces are setting a trap for us. What trick? General Bob was still confused. General William replied angrily, in these 3 agreements, although we have always occupied the majority, the coalition forces have become tougher each time and gradually want back the coalition rights and interests. But our leaders are still delaying, thinking that there is something wrong within the coalition forces. We want to end the war for hegemony early. The coalition forces must have caught this by chance, boiled the frog in warm water, and applied pressure step by step. If we react slowly and delay for too long, we may be severely punished by the coalition forces. Hey, what you said is indeed scary. But, are you sure? Don't dare. But, it's very possible. It's not too late for us to agree to the truce agreement now. We have the lion's share of the benefits. General Bob, please remind the leader quickly, don't look down on the coalition forces too much. Good. Sure enough, the 3rd truce agreement has arrived. It seems that we were not wrong. The coalition troops are still protesting against the content of the agreement. The old guys from the coalition forces have to continue to think about it. However, after thinking about it twice, it still gives people a feeling of humiliation. It sounds quite good. Funny. Then this agreement. Keep stalling. Because of General Williams' concerns, General Bob did report his thoughts, but the news was stuck midway and failed to be reported to the top leadership. Today, the Allied leaders are still gloating. After waiting for 2 days with no results, General William became completely angry. Damn it. The message has either been blocked or ignored. General Bob, if this continues, we will be in danger. Then what can we do? Get ready for the final battle. The leaders still refuse to agree, so we must be ready for an all-out battle. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Different Dimension Red Alert World. Author, Sanchien Lang. Chapter 1028. There are really experts within the Allied forces. Wang Ling did not play by the rules, and General William also liked to take the wrong approach. In the restarted battle for hegemony, the Allies' overall strategy and the design of Wang Ling came from General William's hand. This time Wang Ling directly used the help of the leaders to set a trap for the entire Allied forces. Unexpectedly, General William had already taken precautions and guessed it before his fangs were fully exposed. The sad thing is that General William and General Bob are the leaders at the frontline headquarters, but their status at the top leadership is still insufficient. Moreover, coupled with the overt and covert fighting among their internal member states, they have the position was also quite embarrassing. The suggestions from the 2 frontline generals and even the commander were stuck midway and failed to be reported in time. There was no way. The 2 of them also knew the temperament of the Allied leadership, and now they could only follow what General Williams said and build offensive armored units in batches in advance to prepare for the final battle. Of course, General Williams' conjecture really made him uneasy. During the construction process, General William even personally went to find the king of the member country to which he belonged to clarify his previous conjecture. This time, there was no one with ulterior motives to intercept the message halfway, and the truly useful message was finally delivered to the leader. But the result surprised General William. His king couldn't listen to his concerns, and in the end even kicked him out. After all, in the highest centralized meeting, the leaders of all walks of life had confirmed that the inner courtyard of the coalition was on fire and that the foreign power was responsible. At this time, someone came out and said that the coalition did it deliberately. This leader did not want to accept it. There was no other way. General William, who was frustrated, returned to the front line and informed General Bob of the result. After some worry, he could only continue the current action step by step. The coalition forces don't know this, but whether they know it or not actually doesn't matter. The decision-making of the top leadership of the coalition forces remains unchanged, and it's useless for the generals below to worry. The relationship between the two parties has become more and more subtle now. And under this subtlety, another week passed by in a hurry. The fourth truce agreement of the coalition forces came out. I thought that this time the truce agreement would remain the same as before, with minor modifications and a humble request for a truce. But unexpectedly, this time the coalition went against the norm and became significantly tougher in the agreement. Not only was the global resource allocation split 50-50, but all international positions were also placed on the same footing, as if they were completely aligned with the alliance. The army is sitting on an equal footing. As soon as the agreement came out this time, there was an uproar everywhere. The previous complaints from the coalition forces finally subsided, and only a few people still claimed that the coalition forces should take the majority. As for the Allied forces, the officers and soldiers on the front line were a little nervous. The Allies had taken advantage of the previous 3 truce agreements, and they were more or less used to it. However, this sudden balance made them feel a little unbalanced. In the general command post, General William looked very ugly. Sure enough, the coalition forces really meant this, boiling frogs in warm water and applying pressure step by step. But I didn't expect that they would change so much this time. General Bob was puzzled. If according to the normal process of the war for hegemony, the coalition forces are more likely to win than us, why would they want to do this? Don't they find it troublesome? General William replied, if I'm not wrong, on the one hand, they don't want the troops to continue to suffer casualties. After all, even if Wang Ling is at the vanguard, there will inevitably be large-scale casualties during the war. The war for hegemony can be ended through a truce agreement, that is of course the best. On the other hand, in normal combat, even if the battle for hegemony is concluded, long-term confrontation between the two forces is inevitable, but through the truce agreement, this trouble can be eliminated once and for all. It's quite a shrewd approach, but this shrewdness is calculated on our heads, which makes people angry. General Bob had to choose to believe General William's statement at this time. General William sighed, to be precise, it is not us who are scheming, but the leaders at the top leadership level. Since the leaders have launched a war for hegemony, they will definitely not easily truce. Seizing this mentality, the coalition forces these truce agreements came into existence. They did not expect us to agree to it from the beginning, so although the first few truce agreements were beneficial, they were not the final version anyway. The highlight will be later, when the rights and interests of both sides are equal, or the coalition forces begin to occupy after the victory. I'm afraid we will start to put pressure on the top leadership and force them to agree. However, I have not yet imagined how they will use pressure to make the leaders compromise. Humph! What a coalition force, they are just treating us like monkeys. General Bob was naturally annoyed after hearing the analysis. He stared at the coalition positions on the electronic map and gritted his teeth and said, this kind of strategy is so sinister that it's hard to imagine. The top leadership of the coalition forces can actually do such a thing. General William replied, no, I think this is not the method of the top leaders of the coalition forces. It is completely different from what we know. It is extremely cunning. It looks like Wang Ling's style. Wang Ling. By the way, a few days ago, Wang Ling brought their top leadership to the front line. Could it be that they already had a plan at that time? It was most likely that time. After all, it was only one day after that that the truce agreement came out. Now that it has developed to this point, Wang Ling may be enjoying himself somewhere. Well, now it depends on what the leaders think. According to the situation of the war for hegemony, it would not be bad for us to agree to the current truce agreement. There are indeed experts within the Allied forces. General William really guessed Wang Ling's intention and repeated it exactly. However, now we know that it is actually somewhat too late. This approach could be said to be a conspiracy before, but now that the agreement has been significantly changed, the conspiracy has gradually surfaced and turned into a conspiracy. On this point, even the stubborn leaders of the Allied forces have figured out something about this after reading the Fourth Truce Agreement. Although it is not as comprehensive as General Williams' analysis, they have also captured the minds of the Allied forces and know that the Allied forces can use them for their own purposes. Their arrogance made them angry, and the leaders in the small dark room were all furious now. Of course, despite being angry, they still had no intention of agreeing to the agreement. Only a few leaders proposed to stop in time, but they were immediately rebuffed by others. The fourth letter of equal agreement has been stranded for the time being, and the Allies are still stalling. However, the coalition forces did not want to give them too much time to think about it. As General Williams said, the coalition forces did have ways to force them to agree. Just the day after the Fourth Truce Agreement came out, the coalition's plan to force the emperor to impeachment had already begun. Different Dimension Red Alert World. Author, Sanqian Lang. Chapter 1029. Speaking of which, this plan to force an uterus is actually simple, but there is also a hint of sinisterness in its simplicity. The original approach of the coalition forces was to send out a new truce agreement every other week and gradually modify various doctrines in the agreement. With these 4 consecutive truce agreements, it is easy to guess that there will be new truce agreements in the future. Put pressure on the Allies. The coalition's plan to force the emperor to convict was to concentrate the subsequent pressure and throw it at the Allies. They listed all the regulations to be changed in one breath and replaced them every week. For example, in the Fourth Truce Agreement, the coalition forces and the Allied forces are on an equal footing and have equal resources. However, in the Fifth Truce Agreement next week, the coalition forces occupy the majority of the rights and interests, and even the resource share reaches 5%. 15. The Allies accounted for only 45%. In the Sixth Seal next week, the coalition forces will further seize the status of the Allies, with the resource ratio reaching 6-4. In the Seventh Seal, it intensified even further, almost crushing the Allies in terms of international status, and its resource ratio expanded to 7-3. The eighth letter directly broke through the bottom line. The so-called truce agreement has been renamed as a surrender letter. The Allies have been deprived of all rights and interests in terms of international status, and the resource ratio has been further expanded to 9-1. Of course, what is even more shocking is the ninth letter. The surrender letter was directly changed into a subjugation letter. At this time, the coalition forces had given up the idea of a truce and made peace with each other. They tried their best to defeat the Allied forces and upgraded the battle for hegemony into a battle of annihilation. Completely annex all member states of the Allied forces. The following truce agreements, surrender letters, and crusade letters were each more horrifying than the last. After they were sent out, it was as if a big earthquake had occurred in the two armies. As for the coalition forces, they finally understood the intentions of the leaders and were amazed and at the same time ashamed of their previous annoyance. As for the Allied forces, people have become panic-stricken. As members of the army, they know the strength comparison between the Allied forces and the Allied forces. If the Allied forces really want to, they can really completely annihilate the Allied forces. The Crusade book can no joke. Many people are accusing the coalition forces of being too inhumane, but more people can only sigh and pray that the leaders can agree to a truce agreement as soon as possible. After all, the Allied forces have given enough room for choice. They were even willing to sacrifice most of their own interests to have a truce before. However, the Allies were not sure. After subsequent pressures, the Allies still refused to compromise. On this basis, the Allied forces launched a destructive offensive. Even if word spread, no one could be blamed at all. It was all because the Allied leaders refused to seize the opportunity for a truce. In the small dark room, the leaders of the Allied forces were trembling with anger after receiving these successive truce agreements, and even surrender documents and crusade documents. If when the fourth truce agreement was signed, the attitude of the coalition was still somewhat ambiguous and its fangs were not fully exposed, then now, the purpose of the coalition has been fully revealed, and the top leadership of the Allied forces has also directly omitted the process of suspicion. Now everyone is getting angry anxiously. The purpose of the coalition forces is simple to say, it is nothing more than a truce, and they exerted a lot of pressure to force the Allies to agree. And now even if the truce agreement is agreed to, it will actually not be a loss for the Allies. After all, the Allies did have the upper hand in the battle for hegemony. However, these top leaders regarded all these agreements as insults and just got angry. Of course, no one can tell how much timidity is concealed under such anger. After all, the pressure exerted by the coalition forces this time is too great. So, is this a tactic used by the coalition forces to force the alliance to force the emperor? It's interesting, while the entire Allied forces were worried and nervous, in the general command post, General William, who was originally annoyed, became uncharacteristically calm after seeing the follow-up sample book. General Bob actually didn't want to continue fighting anymore. After reading all the agreements, he couldn't help but sigh, concentrate all the subsequent pressure on this week to force the leaders to agree. What a trick! However, based on my understanding of those old guys, their stubbornness may not be compromised to this extent. General William also admitted, it is actually still beneficial to us to agree now, but I am afraid that the leaders will still not agree. I don't know if the coalition will have follow-up measures. Are there any follow-up measures? Of course, Wang Ling never expected the top leadership of the Allied forces to accept this level of pressure from the beginning. The most ruthless move was yet to come. The day after all the truce agreements, surrender documents, and crusade documents were released, the coalition forces began to vigorously publicize the news. Previously, all agreements were only selectively disclosed to the troops on both sides. Although these troops were not satisfied, they had strict discipline after all, so nothing would happen. However, the people are different. This time, according to Wang Ling's proposal, the coalition's main publicity targets were civilians in the member states of the two major forces. Through various means, they disseminated information almost in every way, including all the agreements promulgated by the coalition, from the first letter to the ninth seal, as well as the replacement time and even the records of the two armies, were all publicized. This publicity caused an uproar like a major earthquake. How many militants are there among the people? Even if some extreme people accept brainwashing and support the war for hegemony, more people still want peace and truce. The first truce agreement promulgated by the coalition forces could be described as a substantial concession. In order to gain absolute advantage in the fight for hegemony, they still lowered their stance and wanted to shake hands and make peace. However, the Allies refused. Subsequently, the coalition forces gradually toughened their attitude, but the Allied leadership still refused. Now that the truce agreement has reached the leveling stage, the Allied leadership is still pretending to be stupid. Looking at the subsequent agreement, the coalition forces have begun to exert pressure in a very tough manner, and the contents of the final crusade book have made the faces of civilians in all the Allied member states change drastically, and they are all worried. This group of civilians don't have as many concerns as the leadership, so why should they care about your power contest? The battle for hegemony has already threatened their survival, so they must not continue it. and the Allied member states happened to be very fond of marches and protests. As a result, the day after all the agreements were publicized, some people with vicious eyes organized a large march to protest against the actions of the Allied leadership and wanted to cease the war as soon as possible. This kind of parade is also very contagious. It started in one country and quickly spread to the entire Allied member states, with large numbers of people taking to the streets. The leadership of the Allied forces can be said to be very troubled by this kind of protest. The coalition forces' actions can make them miserable. But the question arises. Under the large-scale demonstrations by the people, did the Allied leaders choose to compromise? No, they are already in a bit of trouble now. Different Dimension Red Alert World. Author, Sanqian Lang. Chapter 1030. We are against war. Against war. Agree to the truce. Stop turning a blind eye. Agree to the agreement and face public opinion. End the war and give us peace. End the war and give us peace. What a mess. This move by the coalition forces caused chaos among all the member states of the Allied forces. More and more protesters emerged on the streets, holding wooden signs to protest against the inaction of the Allied forces. There were various slogans, one after another, although many guards and even troops want to intercept, but how can they stop it? Boom! Allied forces, please be cruel. The protests spread very widely. Outside the mysterious little dark room, intermittent protests could be heard from a long distance away. Many Allied leaders were overwhelmed. Should we agree to the coalition's truce agreement at this time? To be honest, the Allied leaders thought about this question more than once, but finally rejected it. Why is it difficult to get off the tiger? It's simple to say, but also ridiculous. The Allies decided to restart the war for hegemony, but in the end they were forced by the Allies to agree to a truce. It was really shameful to say this. Moreover, the coalition forces had sent several truce agreements in succession before, but they had delayed them. Until now, they were under great pressure. Seeing the coalition's follow-up agreement, they were indeed unwilling to agree to it. In addition, people from all over the world are demonstrating. Although they are trying to force the top leadership to agree to a truce, the more these demonstrations are, the more they are unwilling to agree. If they agree at this juncture, wouldn't that directly prove that they made the wrong decision before? This person can't afford to be thrown away. It's too easy for someone to poke his spine. There are all kinds of reasons that may not need to be considered in the eyes of others, but these leaders are particularly concerned about it. Taken together, they also eliminate the idea of agreeing to them. As for the original intention of the battle for hegemony, which was to completely crush the coalition forces and monopolize global resources, this conjecture was not taken seriously by them. Agreed to truce. Agreed to truce. Agreed to truce. The chaotic march continues, and there is a general attitude that it will not disband unless the top leadership agrees to a truce. The Allies, on the other hand, have always refused to agree. Instead, they sent out numerous security forces to forcibly block or even drive away the crowd, which caused the conflicts between the upper and lower parties to become more and more intense. With such delay, the week after the fourth truce agreement passed unknowingly. The coalition honored and issued the fifth truce agreement, gradually squeezing the rights and interests of the Allies, and global resources. The coalition directly divided 55%, leaving 45% for the Allies. As soon as this fifth letter of agreement came out, the Allied forces became even more turbulent. The people who were still taking chances realized that the Allied forces were not joking. Panic spread across a large area, causing the scale of the demonstrations that had not subsided. The price skyrocketed again, and the turmoil escalated again. The faces of the officers and soldiers on the Allied front line gradually became ugly. Although there was strict discipline, many soldiers began to curse the top leadership. People's hearts and minds were unstable, and the military's morale was unstable. As the battle for hegemony continued, the Allies were already weak. The Allies gave the opportunity for a truce. They even gave up most of their interests at first, but it was delayed. Now, the Allies' interests have begun to be deprived of them. Who will bear this responsibility? Well, the parade has been going on for so long, and the truce agreement has even begun to exploit the Allies. Why are the leaders so calm? In the General Command Post, General Bob was also particularly angry. General William flashed his eyes. Can you keep calm? I don't think so. I think the leaders are more chaotic than anyone else now. From the time of the fourth truce agreement, I'm afraid they wanted to agree, but they were unwilling to do so. Unable to let go of their shame, they have been dragging it out until now. The scale of the parade is getting bigger and bigger, and it is already difficult for them to make a choice. General Bob was silent, watching the parade in the electronic video, and after a while he made a decision: we can't delay it any longer, otherwise the situation will only become more and more unfavorable to us. General William looked sideways. General Bob, do you think? That's right, we have to take action. Let's start the final battle. Good. The leadership has been procrastinating and refusing to make a decision, but the frontline troops can't wait to get a result. With an order, a large number of troops that had been hurriedly prepared, hiding under the crack generator, ready to go. At the same time, General Bob also released news to the Allied forces that the Allied forces were about to launch their last large-scale attack, and the battle would determine the outcome. The coalition forces did not respond, but were on full alert. While on alert, the front-line Allied bases finally began to mobilize troops on a large scale. However, when they saw the lineup and size of the Allied troops dispatched from the electronic map, the faces of all the coalition officers and soldiers were full of horror and astonishment. Because this time the Allied forces' general attack was even more eccentric, and the teams dispatched were very strange. More than 50 laser UFOs were dispatched from each base, and there were nearly 1,000 UFOs from all bases combined. Units such as laser UFOs are inherently difficult to deal with. When they are in large numbers, it is difficult to resist. However, the Allies took out so many laser UFOs in one go. At first glance, of course it is scary. But what was even more frightening was still behind. When the laser UFO appeared and started to move towards the coalition base, large numbers of Kirov airships began to slowly fly out from under the crack generator. Each base also had 50. The remaining ships, together total nearly 1,000 ships. Good guy, this is no ordinary air force, this is the god of death in the air, the Kirov airship. Not to mention the cost, just the number of Allied troops dispatched is simply appalling. If this were placed in the game, it would probably blow up the map, right? After exchanging this unit technology with the Allied forces, the Allies are really crazy. But behind Kirov's airship, there was nothing. Yes, in this decisive battle launched by the Allies, although the size of the troops dispatched was amazing, the arms were too single. There were only laser UFOs and Kirov airships, and no ground troops, not even an infantryman. Appeared, the lineup was very weird. Seeing this lineup on the electronic map, Wang Ling couldn't help but cursed, these Allied forces are such a waste of resources, building so many air forces. And none of them are their own troops. Isn't it embarrassing? If General Bob and the others heard this, they might be embarrassed. However, after the defeat, Wang Ling had to pay attention and quickly issued an order: brothers, the last battle is here, cheer up. All the enemy's troops dispatched are Air Force, others retreat, the Air Defense Force has a plan 1, give them all to me. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Different Dimension Red Alert World. Author, Sanqian Lang. Chapter 1031. Roar. Following Wang Ling's order, the air defense infantry of the four major field groups in the base shouted in unison, the shouts resounding like roars. Subsequently, the four major field group air defense forces began large-scale operations. The stupid bird flew first, and the Apocalypse tank, which was used as a human shield, drove out of the base first, and then a large number of armed helicopters were in place, and the assembly was completed, followed closely behind. Under orders, numerous anti-aircraft infantrymen methodically got into batches of anti-aircraft tracked vehicles and charged, followed by dozens of rocket pilots at the rear. Not only the four major field groups at Wangling and General Luo Er's base, but also the coalition bases in other regions are now dispatching all air defense forces without reservation and leaving the bases in large numbers. Not to mention, each base has even urgently expanded a row of anti-aircraft guns as a precaution, and the tank factory is also sparing no effort to build anti-aircraft tracked vehicles. Of course, it was a little late to sharpen the gun before the battle. The anti-aircraft crawler vehicle was cheap, but the construction also took some time. However, the coalition base temporarily built another tank factory. Working together, the construction speed was accelerated too much. Major bases often there will be anti-aircraft crawler vehicles coming out, gathering together, and rushing forward. Normally I don't pay much attention to it, but now that all the air defense forces have been mobilized, the scale and firepower are quite terrifying. Buzzing. 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 The war is imminent, and the oppressive and fiery atmosphere, along with the sound of engines, spreads across all battlefield areas. Troops from both sides, whether flying in the sky or running on the ground, are all on their way, gearing up and fierce. Regardless of the general situation of the battle for hegemony or the declaration of war by the Allies, this battle will be the last one, a unique and huge air defense battle. The coalition station and the Allied station were far apart, but the troops from both sides were moving towards each other. Coupled with the rapid speed of the laser UFO, they marched back and forth for less than 2 hours before finally encountering each other. So, the decisive battle begins. Whoosh whoosh whoosh. Whoosh whoosh whoosh. Da 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 da. Dong 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 dong. When the troops from both sides met, there was no buffer or confrontation at all, and they immediately exchanged fire. A large number of laser UFOs intensively fired at the Apocalypse tanks in the front row. Although the Apocalypse tank is tough, there are so many laser UFOs. Under concentrated fire, a large number of Apocalypse tanks will explode with every round of shooting. At the same time, Apocalypse tanks also opened fire in large numbers, and batches of missiles rose into the sky and crashed into the laser UFOs in the sky. The armed helicopters in the rear also opened fire immediately, and their machine guns fired intensively. The army of anti-aircraft tracked vehicles also quickly got into position, put down a large number of anti-aircraft infantry, fired anti-aircraft artillery shells, and bombarded the laser UFOs in batches. The rocket pilots also joined in the fun and hid behind the fire circle to attack additionally. In the history of war, there are many large-scale air defense battles, but none of them can match the scale of this battle. Thousands of laser UFOs spared no effort in firing, indiscriminately shooting at all the blocking coalition forces. The coalition forces were not to be outdone. The roaring sound of artillery was mixed with the sound of a large number of machine guns and rockets. It was heard all the time and resounded throughout the world. The exaggerated sound, superimposed together, was like a big bell, making the scalp was numb and the ears were deafening. All the combined firepower seemed to be able to punch a hole in the sky. The war was naturally accompanied by a large number of sacrifices. Under such a vigorous air defense battle, both sides suffered from horrific casualties at all times. On the Allied side, large quantities of laser UFOs fell one after another, while on the Allied side, Apocalypse tanks, armed helicopters, and even anti-aircraft crawlers also experienced large-scale explosions and crashes. The horrific number of casualties was simply shocking. However, overall, the Allies are in an absolute disadvantage. Although the laser UFOs are powerful enough, and the number dispatched from all Allied bases combined is nearly 1,000, the coalition's air defense forces are even more. All air defense arms combined, there are nearly 5,000 air defense units, almost overwhelming the Allies in number. Moreover, the anti-aircraft shells fired by anti-aircraft tracked vehicles and anti-aircraft infantry are even more advantageous against dense enemy forces. Under the sputtering damage, patches of laser UFOs were damaged. The war lasted for a long time, and the number of casualties became increasingly exaggerated. After such a fierce battle, the number of Allied laser UFOs was finally reduced by more than half, and the momentum of the war was also reduced by nearly half. At this time, Wang Ling finally showed up in person. He quickly rushed to the front-line battlefield with a series of time travel movements. He teleported into the air and transformed into a rocket pilot. He carried an AK rifle at the level of the King of Soldiers and harvested weapons from a long distance. Got the remaining laser UFOs. Although this laser UFO is strong enough, it is only comparable to the air defense force. Whether it is in the game or in the red alert world, no one can shoot with a rifle in the air with Wang Ling's attitude, and it also has firepower. The most powerful AK rifle. As a result, under his strafing, the laser UFOs fell down in batches as if they were made of paper. It was already weak, but now with the addition of Wang Ling, the strongest firepower, the laser UFO troops were even worse. The remaining number was getting smaller and smaller, and was eventually annihilated by the coalition forces. In the first battle of the decisive battle, the coalition won, but the price was not small. The laser UFO army fought back desperately, consuming about a quarter of all the coalition's air defense units, and thousands of air defense units perished here. The tragedy of the war is evident. However, fortunately, most of them were armored troops, with the infantry hiding behind and outputting, so there were not too many casualties. But now, it was not the time to celebrate. After shooting down all the laser UFOs, the coalition forces quickly reorganized their ranks, and then, under the leadership of Wang Ling, rushed towards the thousands of Kirov airships in the rear. It is ironic to say that this Kirov airship is the military technology of the coalition. In the last battle of the Allies, thousands of Kirov airships were built to deal with the coalition. When they were discussing the exchange of arms, Wang Ling and the generals had imagined that one day in the future, they would face the Allies fighting with a large number of exchanged arms. However, he did not expect that this day would actually come. Of course, the coalition forces are familiar with their own arms. Although the Kirov airship is known as the god of death in the air, it has many disadvantages. Not only is its flight speed extremely slow, but its bombing method is too simple and can only be delivered vertically downwards. Although the damage to buildings caused by large bombs is very terrifying, if ordinary troops hide outside the bombing range and attack in a roundabout way, the Kirov airship can say that there is nothing they can do against them. Of course, what is even more limiting is that the Kirov airships have no means of air defense. Facing the air defense forces in the air, they have no way to counterattack and can only resist. Precisely because they knew their limitations, among the coalition forces, armed helicopters and rocket pilots were dispatched in advance and rushed forward. And Wang Ling was even more unscrupulous. He didn't wait for the ground troops. He used time and space to quickly approach the Kirov airships and started fighting. Different Dimension Red Alert World. Author, Sanqian Lang. Chapter 1032. Da-da-da-da-da. Da-da-da-da-da. The Kirov airship is indeed a great weapon, but the speed of this thing is really troublesome. The battle on the front line is over. Thousands of laser UFOs have been shot down, but these thousands of Kirovs have been shot down. The airship was still flying slowly behind. And Wang Ling was not polite to them. He continuously moved through time and space to the nearest Kirov airship army, raised his gun and started shooting. Boom! 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 How hard is the Kirov airship? This is not easy to compare. In short, even a single Kirov airship requires the air defense force to focus fire for a period of time to destroy it. The health and armor are a bit exaggerated. Of course, the main thing is the air force. It flies in the air and cannot be bombarded by non-air defense forces, so it is difficult to compare it with ground armored forces. However, Wang Ling personally tested it and found that under the enhanced version of the AK rifle, it took 3 or 2 seconds to kill a laser UFO. This hardness was about a few points harder than the Apocalypse tank of the ground forces. The embarrassing thing is that no matter how hard the Kirov airships are, they cannot attack air targets. In Wang Ling's eyes, they are just harder targets. Da-da-da-da-da. Da-da-da-da-da. Boom. 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 Maintaining this advantage, Wang Ling opened fire unscrupulously, and within 3 to 2 seconds a Kirov airship would drop. This speed is already extremely exaggerated, and in the eyes of the Allied generals, it is simply terrifying. However, Wang Ling was still not satisfied and still felt too slow. After taking down more than 20 Kirov airships in a row, Wang Ling simply changed his style of play and released a powerful and widespread electromagnetic attack with one hand, trying his best to connect electricity to each other. The remaining ships quickly lost blood under the electric shock, and fell at the same time within more than 10 seconds. Hey, this style of play is much more efficient than the previous one. Wang Ling's eyes lit up, as if he had discovered a new world. Since this method was effective, Wang Ling simply maintained the offensive and continued the bombardment. Before the coalition's air force arrived, he used this method to kill more than 50 Kirov airships. This number would be shocking enough in normal times, but on today's decisive battlefield, this number is not worth mentioning at all, not even 1/10 of the total number of enemy troops. But it didn't matter. Wang Ling didn't expect to be able to completely destroy all the Kirov airships. Just as he was bombarding them, a large number of armed helicopters and rocket pilots from the coalition also arrived and focused their fire on the Kirovs. These two types of air forces are not actually very strong in terms of anti-aircraft firepower, but quantitative changes lead to qualitative changes. They dispatched large numbers and concentrated fire attacks, but they also gave the Allied Kirov airship units a head-on blow, causing frequent falls on all fronts. As if it hit the earth so hard that it shook 3 times. Of course, the most ruthless air defense force is still behind. When Wang Ling and the Air Force joined forces to attack, a large number of anti-aircraft tracked vehicles had already carried a large number of anti-aircraft infantry and rushed to the battlefield. After getting off the vehicle, they started bombarding with rumblings. This air defense force is not something that can be glimpsed. It can be said to be the main force of the coalition's air defense. The dense sound of artillery can be heard, making people's scalp numb. Even the firecrackers added up during the new year are probably not as powerful as those in just a few seconds. The sound of cannons was dense, it was really a continuous barrage of artillery fire. Dong 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 dong. Dong 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 dong. Boom. Boom boom boom. Boom. With their addition, the Kirov airship force was even worse, and the speed of its fall increased sharply again. The number of the originally mighty force was rapidly reduced, and it no longer had the same majesty as before. It just so happened that these ground air defense troops were particularly tricky. After firing for a period of time, after the Kirov airship troops approached, they began to retreat across the board, retreating to the edge of their fire circle, continuing the bombardment, and continuing to retreat after approaching. As a result, under such a strategy, the Kirov airship army was unable to fight back and became a living target for the coalition air defense forces. Later, even the slowest Apocalypse tank army arrived here and fired missiles in rows. The air defense efficiency of these Apocalypse tanks is far inferior to their power against ground targets. At this time, they only served as the icing on the cake, strengthening the momentum of the coalition air defense forces. However, the Allies were in misfortune. The momentum of the Kirov airship force became more and more sluggish, and the overall number dropped sharply. It was impossible to resist such a raging offensive of the Allied forces. As a result, under the ebb and flow of one another, this earth-shattering air defense battle lasted for a long time and finally ended completely. The last Kirov airship was shot down by Wang Ling himself. Oh! 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 At this time, many anti-aircraft infantry cheered and shouted, as if they were announcing the victory of the war in this way. Wang Ling kept flying in the air, looking at the disappearing wreckage of the Kirov airship on the ground, and sighed a few times. In Wang Ling's opinion, this final decisive battle was really pointless resistance. The formation of thousands of laser UFOs and thousands of Kirov airships is indeed frightening. If they really break into the coalition positions, I am afraid that the battle will end immediately, and the coalition forces will be defeated miserably in a very short period of time. Not even Wang Ling could turn the tide. However, the coalition also has global electronic maps, and with Wang Ling's cunningness, how could they put them within the base? The winner was decided halfway through. Oh! 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 General Bob, the commander of the Allied forces, had previously said that one battle would determine the outcome. After this battle, the battle for hegemony would probably come to an end. The group of anti-aircraft infantrymen were naturally very happy to know this. Even the many people in the base, the infantrymen and even the commanders were excited. After the anti-aircraft infantry cheered for a while, Wang Ling interrupted them through the army radio. Of course, despite what General Bob had said before, Wang Ling was not sure whether General Bob could represent the entire Allied forces. A victory at this time may not necessarily mean a true victory. For this reason, Wang Ling also made a temporary decision and ordered all the air defense forces to set up a formation, with the Apocalypse tanks in front to resist, the air forces to stay behind, and the air defense tracked vehicles and infantry troops to line up in the rear and advance forward. This entire line of troops is the sum of the air defense forces of various coalition bases, and is under the leadership of various commanders. But now that it is Wang Ling's order, the base commanders have acquiesced, and the command has been temporarily handed over to Wang Ling. The Allied forces were really frightened when they saw the coalition's posture. Many soldiers looked a little pale. Didn't they agree that a battle would determine the outcome? Why did the coalition still take the opportunity to attack after the battle was over? However, Wang Ling did not worry them for too long. After the coalition frontline troops advanced to a certain distance, they stopped advancing under Wang Ling's order and deployed defenses on the spot. Wang Ling crossed the line of fire and moved directly through time and space, breaking into the Allied forces' headquarters and entering a dark area that was rare on the electronic map. Different Dimension Red Alert World. Author, Sanqian Lang. Chapter 1033. Why is Wang Ling here? Coming to see the Allied forces commander. As the final battle came to an end, the battle for hegemony in the Red Alert world had also come to an end. In order to ensure the maximum effect of pressure, Wang Ling wanted to meet with the Allied commander and tell him something personally. Naturally, the Allied forces have a way to directly shout to the Allied forces, but how can the effect of such a shouting out compare to Wang Ling's personal visit to the Allied forces headquarters? What Einstein did on the global electronic map was somewhat interesting. He specifically blocked a large area where the general headquarters of the two armies were located. This area was so large that it was not much smaller than the battlefield of the decisive battle. Here, he searched for the Allied general headquarters. The headquarters is still somewhat difficult. However, Wang Ling was not discouraged. He identified the center of the dark area and made dozens of time travel movements to break through. However, when they arrived at the central area, they found that it was desolate and was not the location of the Allied General Headquarters. Weird, why are you running around if you don't stay in the middle? Wang Ling was a little confused. He didn't have a specific location. Finding the Allied headquarters in such a large area was not an easy task. However, just when Wang Ling was worried, the northwest area of this dark area in the electronic map suddenly expanded automatically, which happened to reveal the location of the Allied General Headquarters. After Wang Ling saw it, his eyes narrowed slightly. After hesitating for a while, he continued dozens of time travel movements and broke into this area. The appearance of the Allied General Headquarters was similar to that of the Allied forces. There was nothing strange about it. When Wang Ling arrived here, he immediately aroused the fear and vigilance of all the Allied guards. They gathered together and blocked the entrance as if facing a formidable enemy. However, Wang Ling did not attack immediately. Instead, he crossed his arms and shouted loudly, "General Bob, are you okay? Can you come out and see me?" The Allied guards were confused and looked at each other, not knowing what was going on. However, General Bob really showed up right after, followed even by General William and other staff officers and officers in the General Command Post. If Wang Ling suddenly attacked at this time, these leaders of the Allied forces would be in trouble. "Wang Ling, you are so courageous. You dare to break into our Allied forces headquarters." These officers did not dare to cross the line and did not break into Wang Ling's range. Instead, they shouted from a long distance away. Wang Ling smiled and said, "It's not me who's brave, it's you. You actually dare to expose the location of the headquarters. Aren't you afraid that I'll come over and cook it for you?" General Bob snorted coldly and shouted in response, "Wang Ling, you and I are both sensible people. There is no need to do anything stupid here. If you really want to take action, you don't have to wait until now, that is, there are no more truces like before." "Hey, Bob understands," Wang Ling smiled playfully. Now that it was confirmed that Wang Ling was not here to kill, the leaders of the Allied forces became bolder. Under the leadership of General Bob, all the officers slowly walked out of the headquarters. "General," when he was about to enter Wang Ling's shooting range, a guard was still a little worried, but he was interrupted by General Bob with a wave of his hand. Afterwards, many Allied generals walked directly into Wang Ling's fire range and strolled over to a position about 20 meters in front of Wang Ling. Wang Ling really didn't make a move, and didn't even hold a weapon in his hand. Instead, he performed a military salute in a decent manner, and then joked, "The Allies are really willing to give up thousands of laser UFOs, thousands of Kirov's empty boat. This big deal really scares me." General Bob replied, "Why don't you give it up? After this production, I'm afraid it won't be used in the future. Why not take advantage of this time to do the last craziness?" There was something in his words. Wang Ling blinked and seemed to understand the significance of this final decisive battle. However, he did not say it clearly, "That's all, I'm not here to reminisce with you if I don't tell you secret words. Everyone can see that the Allies have no hope of winning in the battle for hegemony, but we don't want to. Things must be done, the truce agreement is our bottom line. However, the leaders of the Allied forces do not know how to cherish it. Until now, my patience is almost exhausted. General Bob, please give a message to the leaders of the Allied forces, war or peace. Let me give you a warm word. After this week, I really have no intention of waiting for the subsequent truce agreement and surrender letter, so I simply ignored it and started the annihilation war. Please make a decision as soon as possible, all the leaders of the Allied forces, and don't make any more decisions. Delayed. You." Wang Ling's warning was truly merciless. After hearing this, the Allied generals immediately became angry. But before he could speak, General Bob waved his hand and interrupted him. Staring at Wang Ling, General Bob had mixed emotions in his heart. It's all you, Wang Ling. If our allies had been more ruthless and really killed you, we wouldn't be what we are now. Wang Ling smiled and said nothing. The allies had not thought of killing him in advance, and their methods were very cruel, but in the end Wang Ling was lucky and escaped. Furthermore, if he dies, the entire Red Alert world will have no vitality. General Williams suddenly interrupted, Wang Ling, can you represent the coalition forces? Wang Ling smiled, why not? The truce agreement is my handiwork. If it is my opinion, the leaders of the coalition forces will not fail to consider it. I am very sure of this. Sure enough, it's you, General Williams' eyes flashed, confirming his previous guess. General Bob sighed, that's all. Now that things have come to a point, it's useless to talk anymore. You can go back. I will report these words and all the achievements truthfully. Then I'll bother you, General Bob. I brought you my words, so I won't stay any longer. I hope we can meet again in the future. Wang Ling left the last words and the last military salute, and then moved directly through time and space and left here. General Bob, Wang Ling is too arrogant. After he left, some allied generals couldn't stand it. But General Bob snorted coldly, form is stronger than people. Wang Ling does have the capital to be arrogant. Moreover, Wang Ling has been merciful to us. To be able to do this is already the end of his kindness. Indeed, as General Bob said, Wang Ling has left too many hands on the Allies, otherwise the current war will only be more tragic. General Bob also accepted the sentiment and personally went to the Allied powers' highest level centralized meeting hall to inform all the Allied leaders of Wang Ling's words and the news of the Allied forces' failure in the decisive battle. The leaders of the Allied forces themselves were exhausted due to the pressure from the coalition forces and the national demonstrations, and were struggling and wandering between war and peace. However, as soon as General Bob's news came, it seemed to be the straw that broke the camel's back. Many Allied leaders finally could not bear the pressure. The meeting lasted less than 10 minutes before they made a decision and agreed to a truce. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Different Dimension Red Alert World. Author, Sanqian Lang. Chapter 1034. Of course, given the temperament of the Allied leaders, even if they agree to a truce, it is not completely unconditional. They do not want to fully follow the Allied forces' truce agreement model and propose another decisive truce meeting with the Allied forces to decide the outcome. A final truce. The Allied forces did not expect these truce agreements to actually take effect from the beginning. Now that the Allied forces finally compromised, they were not aggressive and immediately agreed to this request. Finally, the truce saw results and there was hope. The Allies immediately spread the resolution and directly blocked the mouths of all the demonstrators. The demonstrations that lasted for several days finally dispersed and the people our panicked hearts gradually stabilized. As for those who tried to fish in troubled waters and caused trouble during the parade, they were all arrested and put in jail. When the news reached the front line, all the soldiers and generals breathed a sigh of relief after hearing it. Most of them no longer wanted to continue fighting in this battle for hegemony. Not only them, but also the coalition forces. When they heard that the Allies compromised and the battle for hegemony was over, they all cheered and shouted as if they were liberated. After all, when there is a war, there are sacrifices. Even if they have the advantage, if they continue to fight, there will inevitably be large-scale casualties. Those comrades who accompany them may disappear completely at some point. Naturally, the forest is big and there are all kinds of birds. It is inevitable that there will be some militants between the troops on both sides who do not want a truce. But after all, these people are a very small minority, and the general trend has been decided, so they can only accept it. The location of the truce meeting is still set at the Eastern Castle in the Holy City. After all, this place has special significance to the troops of the two armies. In terms of time, it is set in a week. During this week, the confrontation between the troops of the two sides completely disappeared. Both sides withdrew their troops to the headquarters area, one to show goodwill, and the other to be prepared for accidents that might happen at any time. But there were not so many surprises. Everything was developing steadily and for the better. A week passed quickly while waiting, and the truce meeting was held as scheduled. This meeting is related to the fate and structure of the two forces. It can be said to be the highest level meeting held in the Red Alert world. It is more grand than the previous joint meeting between the two armies. The officers of the two armies may not have to be eligible to participate, the minimum military rank must be general. In addition to military officers above the general level, the leaders of both sides were also present and entered the conference room as the protagonists of the meeting. Wang Ling is only a lieutenant general now, so he is not qualified to participate in the meeting. But who made him a hero of the coalition forces? He even vigorously promoted the truce between the two armies. The leader of the coalition forces made an exception and gave him this qualification, and they entered the conference room together. Not only that, even his direct subordinates, the Wolf Group troops, all came to the Eastern Castle area to work with the Allied forces to jointly take charge of security work. After all, a truce had been decided. Naturally, there were no surprises or changes in the truce meeting. The only time there was a smell of gunpowder was when the leader of the Allied forces saw Wang Ling's rank and expressed dissatisfaction. However, when it was introduced that the truce agreement was actually made by Wang Ling, the faces of the Allied generals turned green. Some radicals even wanted to make fun of Wang Ling, but they were under the pressure of Wang Ling's super-mental power. Surrendered. In this regard, except for the leaders of the Allied forces, no one else made fun of him. After all, they all knew Wang Ling's perversion. Thereafter, the meeting continued normally. Although the Allied forces drew up a truce agreement, it was mainly to force the Allied forces to truce. However, the Allied forces have delayed the truce agreement until now, and they have suffered too much in the truce agreement. They simply acted rogue in the meeting and raised prices. However, the leaders of the coalition forces were not vegetarians. They argued fiercely, with sarcasm, ridicule, threats, etc., which lasted for most of the day before they finalized the final truce agreement. In this truce agreement, the Allied forces did make concessions. In other international affairs, they agreed to share common rights and interests with the Allied forces and be on an equal footing. This was regarded as giving the Allies a candidate. However, in terms of global resources, the coalition refused to give in, and finally confirmed the ratio of 55% coalition forces and 45% Allied forces. Although the Allies are not happy, they have no choice. They are weak in the battle for hegemony. Without this truce agreement, not to mention their international status will be gone, and even 45% of their resources will be lost. Less than. After some goodwill reminders from the coalition generals, the Allies had no choice but to agree. Of course, these so-called global resources are not really the resources of the entire Red Alert world. After all, in this world, in addition to the coalition and Allied forces, there are many other forces and countries that occupy certain resources and territory. No force can compare to the coalition and Allied forces. For these forces, the coalition and Allied forces are not prepared for conflict for the time being. They are not included in the global resources, only those resources that have not yet been explored or are waiting to be exploited. Of course, there were also some other items, such as the division of spheres of influence between the two sides, weapons treaties, etc., which were also discussed together, and a result that was satisfactory to both sides was obtained. At this point, the truce meeting finally ended successfully. The two forces stood up and shook hands to make peace. Finally, a celebration meeting was held, which lasted until night. Before any major changes occurred on both sides, this truce agreement was still in effect. The next day, the two sides had already begun to act in accordance with the restrictions of the treaty, and everything was stable and improving. The war in the Red Alert world has finally come to an end. 2 days later, a grand investiture ceremony was held again within the Allied forces. However, in this ceremony, the number of protagonists was very small. Since the second round of the battle for hegemony with the Allied forces did not last long, the achievements were naturally lacking. Only a few veteran colonels were promoted to major generals, and a small number of major generals were promoted to lieutenant generals. However, there was one exception, and that was Wang Ling. Now that the two armies have reached a truce and the war has ended in the Red Alert world, Wang Ling has played a vital role in it, and his previous battle record was too dazzling. As a result, the leaders of the coalition decided to give Wang Ling the rank of general. He was awarded the Special Merit Medal again, and even Marshal Conway personally came forward to wear it for him. This honor is unprecedented, but it is also quite dazzling among the coalition forces. Haha, for such a young general, and who has won 2 medals of special merit, you are the number one in the coalition forces. Come on, work hard, we old guys are very optimistic about you. After wearing it, Generalissimo Conway also he patted Wang Ling on the shoulder and praised him. Different Dimension Red Alert World. Author, Sanqian Lang. Chapter 1035. Yes, leader. Wang Ling quickly responded with military salute. But in fact, in Wang Ling's heart, there is no need to work hard in the Red Alert world. Without war, the Red Alert should cool down. Fortunately, the military units he wanted have all been upgraded to the top level, and they have been given gifts in the real world. Among them, the teleportation and flying abilities make him even more happy, and they also have physical enhancements and large pens that can be used freely. Points. The fly in the ointment is that Wang Ling's military rank was only promoted to the level of general, and he could not redeem General Li Wiki. As a commander who has been with him for a long time, Wang Ling still has very deep feelings for General Li Wiki. However, due to system restrictions, he can only exchange for people whose overall status is lower than him or at the same level. At the last investiture ceremony, General Li Wiki was added as with the rank of general. Wang Ling has not been able to reach this level so far. However, Wang Ling was also tolerant. He had been with General Li Wiki long enough and didn't have much regret. After the investiture ceremony, Wang Ling was directly left at the headquarters. As a senior military general, he assisted PoortoRich in handling various troop matters. The battle was over, and Wang Ling no longer needed to stay at the front line or in the grassroots units. Moreover, Wang Ling no longer had much nostalgia for the entire Red Alert world, so he simply accepted the order and stayed busy at the headquarters for a while. Time. After briefly handling the affairs of the army, Wang Ling bid farewell to the world of Red Alert for the time being. Lying on the bed in the real world, listening to the shouts of the 3 injured friends, Wang Ling couldn't help but recall everything he had experienced in the Red Alert world before, as if he could remember it vividly, and he thought about it slowly, which gave him a different feeling. What's wrong, Wang Ling? Are you thinking about the Red Alert world again? If you think so, then go back and have a look. Just as he was thinking about it, Agent Tanya in the transit station spoke. To be honest, after hearing the voice, Wang Ling regretted choosing Tanya to redeem permanently. This girl was hiding in the transfer station and could watch Wang Ling's every move at any time. It was almost like surveillance. She is not his daughter-in-law. No matter whether she is eating, sleeping or doing anything, there is someone watching her from an area unknown to ordinary people. That is not to mention how awkward it is. But there is no way. Who told him to make a choice? Just make do with it. After thinking about this, Wang Lingke replied, "Of course you can go back, but it's not necessary. I just need to go back occasionally to take a look. In the past, my focus has always been on the red alert world. From now on, I am afraid that more energy will be spent on it. It's time to get out into the real world." Alright. After stopping Tanya, Wang Lingke turned to ask, "Uncle Hey, the last battle is over now, does the system have any other plans?" Uncle Hay's answer was quite mysterious. The final battle in the red alert world is over, but reality is not over yet. It can even be said to have just begun. What you and Tanya said just now hit the point. The real world, you have to put in more energy. Oh? Has it started? Then who is my opponent? Wang Ling narrowed his eyes, with a rather fierce look in his eyes. Even though Wang Ling frequently uses the different dimensional system and uses the system and the red alert world to strengthen it, he has always remained awake. To the different dimensional system, he is just a host, not the real master. Wang Ling still doesn't know who the real owner is and why he was given the extra dimensional system as a gift. He only knows one thing, and that is the arrival of the extra dimensional system. For him, it is a blessing and a curse. If you want to survive better in the future, you can only use the system to strengthen yourself as soon as possible. Why did Wang Ling put most of his thoughts on the different dimensional system before? In addition to the uniqueness of the red alert world that makes Wang Ling nostalgic and the boringness of the real world, he also holds this idea and wants to become stronger as soon as possible. However, what is supposed to come will eventually come. The charter of the red alert world has come to an end, so the challenges of the real world will finally appear. Uncle Hay was careless about such a critical issue. I told you a few things during our previous conversation. Think about it, are there any clues? Oh, Wang Ling closed his eyes and thought carefully for a moment, then suddenly opened them. You mean, other system hosts? Uncle Hay smiled, it's not that stupid, I let you guess it. But even I don't know who the other hosts are, or even how many there are, so I can't tell you in advance. I can only remind you that when you have completed all enhancements and completed all scheduled arrangements, other host systems will obtain your information and inform their hosts. Wang Ling finally heard something here. From what you said, it sounds like you are raising voodoos. Do you want the hosts of the system to fight each other? Aren't you afraid that instead of killing each other, these voods will actually kill each other, united? Haha, this is impossible because it's not allowed. Okay, I may have said too much. That's all. Just be careful. Uncle Hay said the last sentence and then silenced. Wang Ling, on the other hand, lay on the bed for a long time before gradually looking away and sneered, a challenge from other hosts? It's interesting. The soldiers are coming to cover up the water and the earth, and let me see what other hosts have in the system. Strength. Confidence comes from strength. Wang Ling's current combat effectiveness is strong enough to make him proud of the world and meet all challenges. Cue him, cue him. Don't let him get away, this little bitch just cheated on me. 2 kills. 3 kills. 4 kills. Damn it, my 5 kills. Bowen, what head are you trying to grab? Stop talking nonsense, push the tower quickly. Dot. The 3 injured friends were completely unaware of Wang Ling's situation, and they were still having fun. Listening to their shouts, Wang Ling couldn't laugh or cry. Wang Ling didn't know what was going on with the other hosts. He just wandered around the school every day, occasionally went out for a walk, or accompanied the 3 of them for entertainment. It was relaxed and comfortable. It went on like this for 2 days, but nothing was wrong. Surrounding. After waiting for these 2 days, Wang Ling became somewhat impatient and was too lazy to wait any longer. That night he went out and left school again and came to a barbecue restaurant. This barbecue restaurant is a place where Wang Ling and others often come. He can be said to be very familiar with the environment here. When he arrived, there were many diners in the store. Wang Ling frowned slightly, and then directly released a wide range of spiritual power, hypnotizing everyone present and subconsciously guiding them to understand all the unusual things they saw tonight. Pretend it doesn't exist. Then, Wang Ling turned his eyes and saw the camera in the corner. His eyes focused and a directional mental shockwave rushed away, completely destroying the camera. After doing this, Wang Ling walked to a dining table and sat down without waiting for the waiter to arrive. He shouted in his head, "Uncle Hey, temporary exchange, fifth instructor."